Hey y'all, I was going to make a video for y'all. I was going to read a story for y'all over the summer, since we can't have VBS this year like we usually do. We were going to go read about some of the superheroes in the Bible. Now, I'm going to ask, do you know of any superheroes in the Bible? Are there any that you can think of right off the top of your head? The book that I'm going to be reading out of is Superheroes of the Bible. It's action and adventure stories about real life heroes. Faith is their secret weapon. I don't know if this is going to come to you and looking, picture might be backwards. If it is, I'm sorry. So the first one we're going to do today is the story of David. Now, I know most of you have heard the story of David. This one is a little bit more in depth than most of the Bible stories that you've heard. So, this is the story of David. A boy shepherd conquered a giant and became king through God's might. So after the people of Israel entered the promised land, there came a time when they wanted a king. They didn't need a king because they had God to guide them. But the people still wanted a human king to lead them. So God gave them a king named Saul. At first, he was a good king, but he stopped listening to God. It was time for a king who loved God with all his heart and could teach the people to do the same. God sent a messenger named Samuel to Bethlehem to find the king God had in mind. Samuel was a prophet, which meant he knew God's will, and he called to share it with the people. The king was to be found at the house of a man named Jesse. Now Jesse had 7 sons, known for their strength. So Jesse called the first, thinking he surely had to be the king God had in mind. But Samuel said no. He was not the king God wanted. And each strong son came before Samuel. Each was announced as not the one. Jesse and his sons were confused. Could Samuel be wrong? But Samuel knew God had a plan. He asked Jesse, "Are these all your sons?" And this shows a picture. It says, David was young when he was chosen by God to be a king. Jesse admitted that he had one more son, David, the youngest, who was out taking care of the sheep. Jesse was certain that if this other son hadn't passed Samuel's judgment, David certainly wouldn't be a good candidate either. But Jesse obeyed and had David brought home to meet Samuel. Though small, David was handsome. God spoke to Samuel. He is the one. David was chosen. Samuel brought out the special ram's horn full of oil he had saved for the special occasion. And this is what that would look like. Samuel then anointed David's head, signaling God's choice that David would one day become king. After he was chosen, David went back to work in the fields. Being a shepherd wasn't easy work. David learned to be brave, to protect the sheep from wild animals. Only the bravest would take on a lion. But David killed a lion and a bear to keep his sheep safe. He grew stronger and gave his all as a shepherd, waiting for the time when he would be summoned to be king. After a time, his eldest brother went to serve in Saul's army. They were strong and a big help in the fight against the Philistine enemies. One day, Jesse sent David to bring bread to his brothers and find out how they were doing in battle. When he arrived at the battlefield, he saw that the Israelites were solely outclassed. The Philistines had real giants on their side. One of the giants was named Goliath. He was over 9 feet tall, and his body was covered in armor. David learned that Goliath had been coming to the front lines every day for 40 days, teasing the Israelites. I dare you to choose one of your men to fight me. If he kills me, we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. None of the Israelites dared go up against Goliath. But David spoke up about how bothered he was that Goliath would mock the Israelites and God. He knew he had God on his side, and he wanted to fight on the side of what was good. David's words got back to King Saul, and the king sent for him. David immediately offered to fight the Philistines. King Saul took one look at the young shepherd and shook his head. How can a boy like you hope to defeat a trained warrior like Goliath? Asked King Saul. All David needed to do was remind Saul of how he already killed both a lion and a bear to defend his sheep. He had the strength of God behind him. Saul then looked more closely at David. He saw that David had an inner fire and strength like he had never seen before. King Saul gave David permission to volunteer. He tried to give David his tunic and armor as well, but David refused. On the way back to the battlefield, David grabbed 5 smooth stones from the riverbed and checked his slingshot to make sure it was in good working order. He then approached Goliath. The giant towered in front of him. He looked down at young David and became angry that the Israelites would send such a joke to fight him. I'll feed your body to the birds and the animals, Goliath taunted David. But David stood firm and called upon God. He placed 1 stone in his slingshot and flung it with all his might at the giant. The stone hit the giant right between the eyes, striking him dead instantly. The giant fell. The Israelites cheered, while the Philistines all fled in fear. So there, David is a superhero of the Bible because he is super brave. From what we read in the Bible, David clearly didn't look like a king or a giant slayer. But that fact made him even more useful for God. David would need to depend on God's superpowers, not his own human powers, to do big things. So we need to pray, to thank God for the way he can help us to handle big problems, because we all face big problems every week, sometimes daily. Pray to God to help us to see what he sees in other people, because just like David was small, God seen something in David that we wouldn't have seen in David, because he was so small. Listen to God when he's asking you to stand up for what's right. There's some places in the Bible where you can read more about David. In 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st Kings, where David is chosen to be king, and then where David battles Goliath. I will leave those Bible verses in the description, so you can go through your Bible and read that if you want to. But I hope you enjoyed this story today, and I'll come back with another story hopefully next week, and I hope you enjoyed it. And follow Mountain View's Facebook page and our YouTube page. So I hope y'all are having a great summer and staying safe, and I will see y'all hopefully really soon. Goodbye.